Thank you and welcome to FCA International's February safety call. FCA International serves contractor companies throughout the US and Canada that are signatory to the IUPAT. From 1997 to 2019, FCA's initiatives were substantially funded through the LMCI's collective bargaining contributions. However, in 2019, the IUPAT shifted their funding structure. As a result, a portion of your LMCI contributions, specifically 3 cents from your 10 cents per hour contribution, no longer funds the FCA. This change has created an increased need for direct support from the individual contractors. Make sure you're contributing to FCA either directly or through your local association to ensure you're getting the full benefits of the contractor community. All right, and we'll have our presentation. Welcome Mike Hartnett, our safety professional, to present for us today. Thanks for being with us here today, Mike.
No problem, John. Thanks for having me. Always happy to talk to the FCA members. Today, we're going to be talking about incident investigation. Right. One of the best things we can do to be competitive is to learn from our mistakes. Right. And that's what this session is going to be about, learning how to get the most out of those incident investigations so we can not repeat those incidents. So everybody is aware, FCA has a safety helpline that you can call with questions or email with questions at any point in time. And generally I will get back to you, the same day or early the next when those questions come in. So make sure you're utilizing that resource. Call 844-414-SAFE or use safety helpline at finishingcontractors.org. All right, and as far as news goes, California has just agreed to update their lead standard. This is going to go into effect in January of 2025, with an additional year for businesses to implement some of their requirements. But they've really lowered the blood lead level, right? So we used to have 40 micrograms per deciliter is where that cutoff was, and now it's down to 10. So that's a pretty large difference in that regard. The PEL and action level have both been dropped significant amount to 20% of where it was before for the PEL, and even less for the action level, down to 2 micrograms per cubic meter. Right, so if you're interested in reading the actual text, I can you can go to leadfinal or dir.ca.gov. I can put this in the chat, both of these. Oh, no, I can't. Well, I'll get the chat towards the end of it. Anybody that wants those links, ask me and I'll make sure that I send them to you before the meeting's over. We know that federal OSHA is looking at the lead standard itself, and they have been looking at what some of their state plans, such as Oregon, Michigan, and California, have been doing. So when we see how this rolls out, it can give us a really good indication of what to expect in a few years when federal OSHA starts looking at their lead standard as well, or rules on their lead standard as well, because they're already looking at it. Okay, so our presentation today, we're going to talk about the impact of incidents. Right? We're going to talk about definitions, the investigative process itself, where we can get sources of evidence, how to perform an actual interview, which is a challenging process, especially if we aren't trained in how to do it, and then performing a causal factor analysis. So who's going to be impacted by an injury? If we have an injury on our site, it's going to impact a lot of different people, right? Not only is it going to impact the person that was injured, but it's also going to impact those who are also on that site, right? Their coworkers and team. It's going to impact that project as far as cost, quality, schedule. All of that is going to be messed up when we have an injury, right? And that's going to impact the customer and can impact the community. Right? But really, what we have to be aware of is that the high cost of injuries really impacts our ability to stay in business. And future employment really hinges on the ability to learn from those mistakes and make safety a value as opposed to a priority. Right? When safety is a priority, we do safety first, right? But the one problem with priorities is they change as needs demand, right? We want to make sure safety is a value so that we don't violate that concern for any reason, right? And that's really how we can limit a lot of those injuries. So incident investigation is how we're going to find how to stop it from happening again, right? We're going to determine the cause and then determine what corrective measures we can put in place to make sure that it never happens again. And we're going to do that pretty simply by asking who, what, when, where, why, and how. Right. And that's really the foundation of that incident investigation. Right. So when we're looking at who do we want to talk to in an incident investigation? Who do we need to bring in? Eyewitnesses. Right. And let me stop 1 second and back up as far as incident investigation, because this is a question I get all the time. How much time should we be spending on incident investigation? And should I be spending a week? Should I be spending a day? Should I be spending an hour? And it really comes down to what was the possible outcome? How severe was the possible or probable outcome of this incident? Right. So there's instances where I would say a near miss where somebody by 3 feet avoided dying, but nobody was injured, would get more investigation than an injury where we got 2 stitches, but that was the worst severity that it could have been. Right. So the amount of time you put in should reflect what the probable severity of the outcome is. And when we have these incidents, we want to make sure that we talk to the eyewitnesses, those that were on site, right? Anyone who heard or saw anything, anyone who might have been at the scene at the time, right? We can talk to our delivery, our truck drivers, if they were dropping off equipment at that point in time, did they see anything? The crew themselves, the foreman. We want to make sure that we have talked to those people on site. And we also want to make sure that we may need subject matter experts, right? So a good subject matter expert is somebody that's going to know the practice of what was being done, right? So if we have an injury related to a scaffolding, we really want somebody that knows about scaffolding for us to talk to regarding this incident and what could have been done differently, right? So subject matter experts, likely they're going to be internal, although you may have external subject matter experts, such as, the FCA safety helpline would be a good place to drop a question if you had one for something like that. So the what is, what are we going to be looking into? Obviously, we're going to look into those incidents that have personal injury or property damage, right? Always want to investigate those, but we should also be investigating near misses, right? Those instances where if this had happened 2 seconds before or 2 seconds afterwards, somebody would have been injured in this way. Those need to be looked at as well, because they are, those are the free lessons that we can learn. Other things that we can investigate are physical hazards, right? If we go on site and we see that we're having an issue with our, let's say our Baker scaffolding, right? We had somebody with a near miss, almost fell off of Baker's scaffold. It was at, it's 6 foot, which didn't require fall protection because it's a scaffolding. But we realize we've had a couple of these near misses, so let's investigate that physical hazard and determine what we're going to do about it. Unsafe behaviors, such as surfing that scaffold, could be another thing that we could do an incident investigation. How widespread is this behavior? Was this just a one-off where we caught John doing it, or is this something that you go to any job site and if they don't know the safety guys there, they're going to be doing this, right? So it's not always what we think of incident investigation where we're only investigating incidents where people were hurt, right? We want to expand that. When do we do the investigation? Immediately, right? Immediately after that incident. It should be started by the foreman on site. We should be training our foreman on how to start gathering the information needed if there's an incident. You want to do it immediately because your witnesses are going to remember more. Your scene is going to be like it was at the time of the incident. If it's taking 45 minutes or an hour and a half for the person that's doing the investigation to get on site, on a standard construction site, a lot of things can change in an hour, right? So we want to get it as close to as when that incident happened and preserve important evidence. Right? There might be information that we can get that won't be there, right? Either it's been moved, it was something caused by another contractor and they've covered it up. It was something that your employees don't want you to know, so they've covered it up. There's lots of reasons why we want to get that investigation started earlier, and we want to get the foreman on site to start doing that. So where do we do that incident investigation? On site. It's the best place, right? You can secure it as soon as possible and do it there. It's better for questioning because then the witnesses that you're talking to can say this over here, that over there, and clearly point out what they're talking about instead of trying to explain something and not getting across their message. Right? And why? This is where a lot of people, I think, mess this up, is the why of incident investigation. If you're looking for somebody to blame, you need not do an incident investigation, right? Because 9 times out of 10, you can figure out who it is without doing an incident investigation. But knowing who's at fault, does that make it less likely to happen again? No. It doesn't really benefit us other than making us feel good, right? It feels good when we catch the person that's guilty and we punish them. That is a reward all on its own. However, that doesn't make the company get better. It doesn't make the company learn from its mistakes. So the main reason we're doing this investigation, the reason why, is to make sure we don't repeat that incident. Make sure that we protect our employees from those injuries. And sometimes that means protecting the employees from themselves. I said sometimes, probably most times, but that's part of our responsibility as employers is to protect our employees. So the reason that we're doing this is to collect data, right? Collect information to identify what those contributing causes are. Right? Not the one main cause, but as many contributing causes that we can work on. Right? And then we want to prepare a report that details what those are so that we can share it with our people in the field, right? With our field superintendents, share it with our foremen, share it with our frontline workers so they know why somebody got hurt and they learn what we learned, right? Because keeping that information in the office doesn't benefit those in the field, right? And they are the ones who are most likely at risk for injuries. This also allows us to analyze reports to develop trends. Right, we have an incident this year where somebody, pulled their back while moving a ladder, and then we look back at the reports that we've written over the past 5 years, and we see that we have 4 different incidents that are very similar, that we use similar corrective actions that would have prevented it from happening. And guess what? None of those corrective actions are actually being used, right? It's really important that we're able to have that information to look back on, because we often try to recreate the wheel again and again. But if we have a solution that we think would work, and we put it out there and it wasn't sustainable, or we didn't do what we needed to get it to be fully impactful and utilized, or there was so much resistance from the field that it didn't have a hope, right? We need to make sure we understand what those are so we can get good corrective actions put in place, right? And the why is develop corrective actions and prevent future incidents. Additionally, on top of that, there's otherwise. Allowing unreported, uncorrected incidents is bad for business, right? It's going to impact your employees, the rest of the team that are on site. It's going to impact your schedules and your budgets. It's going to impact your workers' compensation, what you can bid on, what you can't bid on because of an EMR. All things are greatly going to be impacted, and we can't allow unreported or uncorrected incidents. It's just bad business, right? And reporting and correcting them translates into a competitive edge against those other contractors who are not doing what they're supposed to, right? I know when I was in the field, what I generally heard is, you fall off that ladder, you're fired before you hit the ground, right? And I don't know if that's a common phrase anymore, but I've been out of the field for about 10 years. But 10 years ago, I probably heard it in 14, right? It was a pretty common saying in the painting field in the Chicago area. That is an area where we can get better, right? When we have proper reporting, when people are not afraid of losing their job or getting laid off by reporting an injury, then we're going to get that information so we don't get more incidents happening, right? And if you don't report an incident where you got, where you strained your wrist a little bit, maybe they got off lucky with that incident. And the next one is going to be a back injury that's life impacting, that is going to cost the company $250,000. Right? We want to make sure that we learn these and stop them from recurring. Learn what those issues are. So when we look at the investigative process, we're going to start with gathering information, right? And that's the majority of what we're going to be talking about today, is how to gather that information. Once we have that information, we're going to want to chart it, right? There are a lot of different ways to do a root cause analysis, right? They have the 5 whys, they have the Apollo system, they have the fishbone system. There are as many systems for trying to determine what that root cause is, probably, as there are root causes. So this is not to train you how to do those analysis. We'll talk about what the purpose of them are, and we'll throw out some quick information on the 5 whys, but this is more about how to gather the information, right? Whatever system you utilize to find that root cause, lean into it, right? If it's something we already know how to do, continue to use that. We're going to try to get all of the causal factors, all things that led to the incident, not just the root cause. We want to correct as many of those issues as we can. So the investigative process starts at the site as soon as possible with pictures. We should be teaching our foremen to take that cell phone out of their pocket and take a whole bunch of pictures. as many pictures from as many angles as you can get. Right? There's no such thing as too many pictures. I've done plenty of incident investigations after the fact where I was looking for information and the pictures just didn't have it in it. Right? We knew where that important piece of information was. We knew it was to the left of the door by 10 feet. And I looked through the pictures and there's just nothing showing it. Right? You don't know what you need pictures of when you're taking the pictures. So we try to take a lot of pictures from a lot of angles, from far out, from close in, and hopefully we get as much as we need. Then we want to sketch or draw the scene, right? And it doesn't have to be a nice sketch like this, very beautiful. You can use crayons on a napkin. What we're trying to do is show relation of objects to objects, right? This was located here, that was located there. The person was standing here, the electrician was working over here, right? So a basic sketch, it doesn't have to be to scale, just as much information as you can have at the skill level that you have, right? We're not looking for Picasso. He probably wouldn't be very good at this type of sketch anyways, wouldn't be very usable. But still, if that's the type of sketch you get, at least it may have some information that you need. And then take measurements to consider scale. We have a sketch. It's good to say this is, 20 feet away. This is 5 feet away. They're actually 10 feet away from this edge. It's good to have all that information, right? So this is something that we should be training our foremen to do. Take pictures, draw a sketch, get some measurements, right? It's pretty straightforward and simple. There's one other thing we need done in the field right away, but those three are really important. So when we look at sources of evidence, people, positions, parts, and paper, right? Those are the four things we're going to be looking for. I'm a safety guy, so everything has to start with one letter, or it's got to spell something. And I only have two different methods. So people, right? These are the people that you're going to interview. And this is the other place that your foreman really needs to execute well. We need to make sure that the foreman is giving out witness statements for the people to fill out before they talk to each other. Okay, because groupthink is very strong. Now, you wouldn't think it looking at the news and listening to the politics, but for the most part, if you put four people in a room, they want to agree, right? As long as it's not about politics. So if four of us are there, we see one person gets injured, and John says, he did this and that happened. And maybe I didn't see him do that, but John said it. So when you ask me, I'm going to say, well, he did this and then that happened, even if I didn't see it, right? Even if what John says is opposite what I saw, I might go, well, John's been at this for a long time, so I'm going to go with his opinion, right? We want those witness statements before groupthink has set in. Hand them out before people have talked about the incident, because they're going to talk about it. So having the foreman have those forms on site so that he can hand them out and get the initial statement from the witnesses. And that's what we need from our field, right? Those initial witness statements. From there, generally, it could be the foreman, depending on what the incident is, but we may have somebody from the office do the rest of the interview process, right? But either way, we want somebody that's trained in how to interview, because it's a little bit challenging. And we'll talk about that training, and we'll do some of that training today. You're going to want to talk to anybody that saw it. You're going to want to talk to the person that got injured, right? Anybody else that was on site that may have seen it, especially people that don't work for you, it's all the better, right? If they don't have skin in the game, often they'll get more truthful information out of somebody than that. Supervision, and like I said, anybody else that you saw. Now, it can be challenging. Employees in the field don't necessarily want to get their coworkers in trouble, right? If you're dealing with the electricians, they're pretty mad at the painters for painting all their stuff, so they're gonna feed you BS anyways. It can be very challenging on a construction site, right? There's a lot of contention and a lot of issues, but interviewing is still, despite people not being very good witnesses, it's still some of the best information we can get. Most witnesses are not good because they're timid or suspicious or talkative, right? But overall, they're not good observers. They aren't good observers because they've never been trained how to observe, right? A police officer sees an incident, they have been trained on observation. They're pretty good at it. They can generally reflect what happened pretty well, but your average person doesn't, right? There wasn't anything to tell them to start paying attention. It was business as usual. Everything was going along as normal. So there's nothing to tell them that, hey, I need to start remembering what these details are until there's actually the injury, right? And people just forget details. They can also be influenced by other witnesses, right? That groupthink setting in. If the incident is bad enough that we have news coverage on it, then that's going to impact it. And us as investigators can definitely impact and influence what people say, right? When we ask questions, just be like, Jeremy, John did this, right? And you saw John do it, didn't you? That's going to impact what the response is. Maybe not everyone. Jeremy may very well be like, no, John didn't do it, right? But then Mike's like, John did it. It was John. We want to make sure we don't lead those, right? Ask your questions, try to be objective about it. Personal belief or opinion, reluctance to talk, reluctance to get other people in trouble, injury, shock, all these things are going to be problematic, right? All these things are going to reduce how valid the information we get is, okay? But we need to be aware of it. How do we locate witnesses? For the most part, the vast majority of your interviews are going to be for smaller events that are not going to require you to go out and find other witnesses, right? But if we have a fatality or a career-ending type incident, it is worth the time to go and see if we can get more information. If there was news coverage for it, first, you need to have but you need to be aware that the news media, they're good investigators. Okay, they get more information out of people than you can. However, you're a person they're trying to get information out of as well, right? So this can be challenging. If you go to the news investigator, they might have more information from you, but they might take more information from you that then goes on the news, right? So you have to be careful with that. Hospital, your ambulance drivers, EMTs, sometimes they can share, or other people that happen to be on site at the time, like delivery drivers. One witness will often lead to another during that interview process. And we're talking to John, he's just like, yeah, and I was sitting there, I was talking to the iron worker when we heard this noise and we looked over and da 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 da. Well, now I know I can talk to the iron worker and he may be able to give me information on what happened as well, right? Another perspective. Okay, so next we go to parts. Parts is easy, right? These are physical items. So we want to make sure that we've taken pictures of anything, broken items, switches, guarding that's broken off, equipment, power tools, whatever it is, we want to make sure that we've gathered all of those items, that we have them set aside. Once again, if this was a severe injury that we know is going to end up in litigation, it might be worthwhile to take that mini Perry and pull it out of service so that we have it in case we need it, or pull it out and thoroughly document its condition, taking pictures of everything, because we may need this information later, right? Further down the road. Because one thing we know about injuries is that they often end up in lawsuits, but we don't know that immediately, right? We know that 2 years down the road when we get a call from a lawyer. So paper is another thing that we need to get. And this becomes extremely important when we're talking about litigation, right? Because paper is king in the courtroom. Paper is king. And if you don't get that paper right away, that paper goes away, right? So it could be misplaced. It could be altered. It could be disposed of, or it could be overlooked, right? It's not going to attract itself. If you do not go out and look for the inspection results related to that. When was the last time we had preventative maintenance performed on that lull or on that aerial lift, right? Well, we got it from the rental company. Which rental company? Where's the rental agreement for it? Where do we have that information? When was the last time the person was trained on it? Generally, our training is usually we keep our last training that was performed, right? So if we perform mobile elevated work platform training every 2 years, and the last time we did it was June, the incident happened the May prior, and he had training, but we trained again in June, at which point we got rid of the training from a year prior. And now we don't have any evidence that this employee was trained prior to the incident. So what I suggest you do on these incidents is gather the documents that you need, copy them, and put them in a file related to that incident, right? Either a physical one or a digital one. But we want to make sure that we have that, because when it comes to litigation, paperwork, we need to have it. And we dispose of paperwork periodically. And we may need to have it for longer than we're required to keep it, right? So what type of things am I talking about? Anything that has documentation, inspection reports, equipment logs, maintenance logs, training. Training really does become important. Any license or certifications. Like I said, when we update those, we don't necessarily keep record of the older. Drawings and manuals for the equipment. All of those we need to have. Okay, and last but not least is positions. And we talked about that with the sketch that your foreman's going to do on the site, right? Maybe when if we have a secondary person going out to site to do interviews or something like that, maybe they can go ahead and make another drawing about the relationship between what's around the incident, what impacted that incident. How far away was the witness? How, where was the part that was broken? Those type things can be really determined, right? And documented. Because like I said, we often don't get a call for a couple of years to know that we really need this information, right? Because if litigation comes, it's not going to generally come quickly. And we want to make sure that we have what we need if we need to defend from that as well, right? So the interview process is challenging, right? Interviewing, it's hard, especially when we haven't been trained. So we're going to go through some training on interviewing right now and understand we have a definition here, right? Interviewing is a form of oral communication between two parties where one of the parties is attempting to draw information out of the other, right? Another definition I like to use is interview is generally one person trying to get information out of the other person that the other person doesn't want to provide, right? It can be very challenging. So what we want to do is make sure our number one goal here is to set the person that is being interviewed at ease, right? to calm them down. Let them understand what the process is. Right? We're going to interview people one at a time. If we interview people in a group, we will get one story. We will get one perspective. And it's really important that you say to the interviewee and to yourself that we're looking for facts, not fault. Right? We're not looking at fault for who to blame this for. We can blame people without interviews. We're looking for facts to figure out how to make sure we don't have this happen again. How can we learn from these mistakes? Then you want to select a place. The scene of the incident works really well as long as it wasn't traumatic. Right? If an employee died there, you certainly do not want to bring people back to where they saw somebody die to ask them questions. Right? So if it wasn't a traumatic incident, the scene of the incident works well. Over in HR's office is a terrible place to have this interview, right? You are definitely on enemy territory. There's no way you are ever going to put me at ease in an HR person's office, right? And I'm sure I'm not the only one. So we don't want it to be our office either, right? If we do have to use our office or a supervisor's office, then we want to kind of change how we're using it. And supervisor usually sits on one side of the desk with the employee on the other. Bring the chair out front so that both people are sitting on the same side of the desk, right? Kind of change the outlook of it, kind of change that impression. We already asked the foreman to take those initial statements, right? So at the start of the interview, we want to provide them with their written statement. Let them refresh their memory off of what they said, right? Because that drift, as far as what happened, that groupthink, is not intentional. Right? They may think, well, whatever everybody else said has been talked about for the last week. Well, this is how I think it happened now. And now you read your witness statements and you're just like, wait a second, that is right. No, I saw them do that despite what everybody says. So always provide that written statement so they can refresh their memory. You can ask them to provide more descriptions on there, ask them to reconstruct the conditions, right? But you want to make sure we're not rushing into it. Start off with normal conversation, non-business chat. You should have a relationship with your employees. Use that relationship, leverage that relationship to try to get beyond that nervousness, right? Is this a witch hunt type mentality? We have to set them at ease. Now, after doing this for a few years, your employees will know that when you're asking questions, it's because you're looking for things that you can do differently. And that's what we should be looking for. And we'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about root causes. But if it's not something management has control over, it's not a root cause because we don't have control over it. So we can't use it to lessen the likelihood of reoccurrence. Okay, but we want to make sure that we are putting people at ease. Expand the interview once they start feeling a little bit more calm and relaxed. Make sure that they know not to blame. Now, I will tell you right out of the gate, some of your employees are going to say, it's John's fault. Now, he had it coming. He knew not to do it. I told him not to do it. He decided to do it anyways. The first thing your response needs to be, because you will hear that, is, hold on a second. We're not looking for blame here. Okay, what I'm looking for is to figure out how we can make sure this doesn't happen again. Right? It's up to you to reset that expectation because people will blame. Right? Not only is that the most common thing that they see people looking for in an interview, but it also, they're pretty pissed at John because they know it was John's fault and he did it anyways. right? You're probably mad at John too. I know I've done plenty of incident investigations where I've had to be like, okay, Mike, calm down. Do not be mad at this guy. He knew better, but you've done things that you knew better plenty of times. Just didn't end up with this outcome. So try to step back from that. Here's the hard part. It's your job to evaluate credibility. And that's a lot of what you're doing with the interview process. You're trying to get information and you're trying to evaluate that credibility. And know that you may have to come back with a follow-up interview. Right? Oftentimes, and usually when you get to about the last person you're going to interview, they drop a bombshell. They're just like, no, I got to ask, I need confirmation on this piece of information. Right? One person said it. I'm not going to take that as fact. I need confirmation of this item. So I may have to follow up interview with those other people again. So that evaluating credibility is challenging, but what you're going to do is you're going to use nonverbal communication. I think over the last couple of years, with everybody having half of their face covered, and us seeing how many miscommunications we have just because we couldn't see half of somebody's face, this nonverbal communication thing is huge. Right. So I'm going to talk about some cues that you can look for. And my expectation is not for you to memorize all of these. Right. My expectation is you go to your Google box before you do some interviews and look up some nonverbal communication cues. Right. You want to use this mostly so that you can sense the temperature in the room. So you can see when the person you're interviewing is really uptight and nervous, and you need to calm down the situation to get good information out of them. Or if they're doing something that makes you think, I'm not sure if I believe this. Right? Now, nonverbal communication does not have a smoking gun. Right? You can't say, well, I don't believe him at all because his eyes were looking shifty. Well, maybe not. Let's not come to that determination, but after the interview, you might want to note it. And not sure about the validity of the statements, seem to have shifty eyes while saying it. Okay, so here's some nonverbal communication. Open hands, palms up, coat unbuttoned. Right? This generally says that we're comfortable in the situation. Right? This is an open to the discussion. Right? Arms crossed tightly across the chest. This is defensive. This says, I do not want to be in this situation. Right? I'd like to be out of this situation as soon as possible. I find myself in that a lot of times when I'm talking to my wife and I have to stop, just in case she knows nonverbal communication. I don't want to get in trouble. Leaning forward in the chair usually means engaged, right? Okay, feet flat on the floor. Does anybody have their feet flat on the floor right now? John does? That's weird because only about 10% of people I ask actually have their feet flat on the floor. Usually it's a sign of somebody trying to look at ease. Right? But some people sit with their feet flat on the floor. Like I said, this is not a smoking gun anywhere, right? It's just to help you gauge the validity, whether or not you think you agree with what they're saying, right? Hand on chin or cheek is called a hand bar usually, and it usually means that they're under stress, right? Nervousness. Same with cleaning, handling objects, nose rubbing, clenching or wringing hands. All of these are signs of agitation, right? They're anxious, they're nervous, and we want to try to calm down the situation. Maybe back off from the questioning and see if we can get conversation on not related till we can calm down a little bit. Right? And then lack of eye contact. right? Lack of eye contact in Western culture generally says there's a problem with the truth, right? Maybe not that they're lying, maybe they're leaving something out. It's hard to tell. But in many other cultures, Asian and Middle Eastern culture, eye contact is inappropriate, right? So it becomes challenging. We do not use nonverbal communication as a smoking gun, but it can really help us get more information out of people by being able to judge the temperature of the room and know when to back off from questions and calm them down. Okay, so closing the interview, you're going to want to thank them. You're going to want to make sure you have contact information if you didn't already. Tell them that you might have additional questions. Right. If you do have additional questions, if you have to bring people back in for a second interview, don't bring one person back in for a second interview. Bring multiple people in. Right. Otherwise, people get more nervous. And I'm the only one being called in, and everybody knows I'm coming in a second time because people are going to talk. All right. So in between interviews, at the end of one interview, don't schedule them back to back to back. Right? Give yourself a little bit of time in between them if you're doing them. You want to do your data analysis, right? How accurate do you think the witness's statements are, right? And you may put a why on it. That way, after you've done all of the interviews, you can review it. And, I didn't agree with John. He looked a little bit, he looked shady when he was talking. He looked shady. So I wasn't sure. But then the other ones totally back up everything John said. So, okay, then, we have agreement. So you want to make sure you know how accurate you think they are. It's a judgment call on your part, right? What are facts? What are solid facts versus what are our opinions, right? We're trying to gather facts, not opinions on this one. Which facts are causal? Okay. Causal. If we removed that, it would not have happened, right? It really would have reduced the likelihood. And which ones contributed, right? Poor lighting contributed to the incident. But even with lighting, it very well could have happened anyways, right? That would be a contributing fact as opposed to a causal fact. And then is any of this information that you've gathered a conclusion, right? Because we want to wait on conclusions until you have all of the information. So if you have conclusions in here already, we should be eliminating those conclusions and just have the objective facts. Are there any other questions that need to be asked? Now, this is happening in between each interview. And you are certainly after interviews going to be like, okay, I need to ask about this. I definitely need to ask about this. And oftentimes, if you ask later people, you can get enough information from them that you won't have to go back and get more information from people you've already interviewed. So once we've gathered all of our information, we're going to do that causal factor analysis, right? So causal factors, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for the causes of the incidents so that we can recommend corrective actions, right? How do we stop it from happening again? So causal factors, who did what wrong, right? What equipment failed? So I said we weren't looking for fault. That doesn't mean there isn't fault, right? Just because we're not looking for it doesn't make it not exist. When there is fault and it's clearly there, we should use discipline, right? I mean, we shouldn't ignore something just because an injury happened because of it, right? So when we find a causal factor that somebody did something intentionally wrong, made a decision to do something wrong, then we should be, using our corrective discipline policy. So, but the emphasis needs to be on all possible causes, not who to blame, right? If somebody did it but not intentionally, do we need to punish them for it? What's the benefit in that? It's going to make that person maybe less likely to do that. But if it was a mistake on their part, then maybe not. But we want to make sure we find all the causes. We're not looking for who to blame. Oversights and mistakes should not be ignored, right? The responsible party should be determined when appropriate. If facts support it, this one should be used. But the investigator must be objective and analytical. When you are investigating a serious injury and when you're investigating a fatality, it can be difficult to be objective and analytical. I investigated a fatality where 2 weeks prior, I had trained this kid in confined space entry. And him and his best friend were both in that class. One was a foreman, and they did well. They knew the information. They knew what was required of them. And then when it came time for them to use it in the field, both of them completely ignored it, and one of them died. Right? It's real hard to remain objective in that type of situation. But it's essential that we do. Because no matter how mad I was at the foreman, wasn't anywhere near as mad as that foreman was mad at himself. Right? So what we are looking for are all of the causes, right? But the root cause is really what caused the causal factor, right? What upstream cause was there that led to this happening? That if we corrected, it wouldn't be there. Now we get this through a lot of different methods. Like I said before, fishbone's a common one, hollow method. I would say the most common one is the 5 whys. We continue to ask why until we get to the most upstream reason, right? There was a trip because of an oily patch on the floor, right? So what's the root cause? Well, there's oil on the floor. Well, why was there oil on the floor? Well, the equipment had a lubrication leak. Okay, had that been reported? Yeah. Okay, well, why wasn't it acted upon when it was reported? And we keep on asking whys till we get to one where there's no further upstream we can go. Right? Why was that equipment leaking? And we keep on going till we run out of causes, right? But the important part about a root cause is it needs to be something under management's control. Too many times do I see investigations where they say, you know what the issue is? Worker distraction. Can anybody here tell me how to stop a worker from being distracted? Okay, so it's not a root cause, right? Employee misconduct. Does anybody here know how to stop employees from misconduct? It's not a root cause. It has to be something that management has control over. If we have control to fix it, then it might be a root cause, because the object of the investigation is to find something that'll stop it from occurring again. And we have to have control over that for it to be effective, right? So we're always looking for a cause that we have control over. That doesn't mean that we don't try to impact those other causes. We try to find corrective actions for all of the contributing causes, but that root cause is always something we control. So when we're looking at incident investigation, we're not looking for who to blame, right? But what happened, how it happened, why it happened, and what we can do to prevent it from happening again. So we use people, plant, and process a lot when talking to clients as far as safety goes. And there's generally parts of each in most incidents. Human factors are going to people, the equipment and site factors are going to be plant, and the way that we do things is going to be process. So we should be looking for items across all of these. Right? What are the causes or contributing factors through all of these? Right? Was it the people, training, skill, ability, focus? Was it the plant, environmental controls, ground conditions, equipment, engineering controls, materials, or the process? Right? Have we been doing what we're supposed to be doing, what we train to, following our standard operating procedures? Right, so here's an example of the 5 whys. Employee cut his leg with a running power saw. Why was the saw running? The worker was cutting pipe. So people factor. Why didn't he put down the saw? Felt it would slow down his task. Right? That's a people factor. Why did he feel that it was okay to operate it like that way? He wasn't trained any other way. That's a process factor. We should be looking at that better. Why wasn't he trained properly? No established process or procedure for training them. Right? We just haven't looked at that before. So that's a process factor. And why is there no established process or procedure? They hadn't recognized it as a hazard in the past. Right? So that's a 5 whys. That's one example of it. Trying to get to that deeper reason that led to it. So our corrective actions would be multiple, right? For people, put the saw down when moving pipe. We make sure that we talk to our people about that process, and our expectation is it takes more time if you put the saw down and move the pipe. Do so, right? And if we have an incident, most incidents are going to cost between $40,000. I think $40,000 is the cost of the average incident. I mean, how many minutes of putting a saw down do you have to add up to that $40,000 loss? How many pipes do you have to cut to make up for that loss? So we could either have a second person assist with that task or make sure they're putting down the saw. For the facility, we could have a stop saw blade from spinning after the cut, right? Purchase saws with blade brakes to do that. And the process, we can establish a written process defining how the work should be done, train workers to that procedure, and then enforce that. So we want to directly address root causes, right? What are the controls we have in place? Make sure that they are in place and they're working. Be fair and efficient. Look at all of the factors, not just the causal factors. Try to correct as much as you can. But they have to be, your corrective actions have to be fair, right? Correctly identified, efficient. If we make a 1-step process into a 12-step process, is that really going to be followed in the field? Are we really going to be able to talk our foreman into enforcing that? Right? It needs to be an efficient, effective way of solving the problem. If it's overly restrictive, it's unduly restrictive, it's not going to be sustainable. Right? And then we've wasted our time and whatever time we take training our employees. Right? So we want to find an advantageous cost benefit of alternatives that is sustainable, that we can get our field employees to do. The results of the investigation, we want to make sure that we write a report. Right? Write down that information, because a couple years down the road, you may need to refresh your mind on what actually happened if you get litigation. Right? Or if you have a very similar incident, you're going to want to refresh, well, what did we find in the last one? Where are the similarities? And you might stop yourself from putting the same corrective action that you put in for the last one, right? And you find those lessons learned and pass them out. So unless you fix those upstream causes of incidents, you're going to continue to have those incidents. So avoid taking the easy route, doing what's most comfortable, which is finding who to blame and punishing them, right? Feels good, doesn't necessarily help. Get to that root cause, that most upstream problem, fix that, and then look at it 6 months down the road and make sure that correction is still in place.